Hello, and welcome to SDIA's Transparency Now interview series. My name is Michael Oghia. Earlier this summer, we announced our Open Data Hub, a resource meant to boost transparency, trust, and data availability to help researchers, industry, and society realize a sustainable digital economy. In the lead up to its launch, we are recruiting ambassadors to help raise awareness about the initiative, as well as galvanize support. Transparency Now gives us an opportunity to sit down with our ambassadors to explore why they signed up for the role and what greater transparency will mean for the digital infrastructure sector. Joining me today is Ciaran Flanagan, an Ireland-based data center expert and one of our newest Open Data Hub ambassadors. Welcome, Ciaran.
Thank you, Michael. Good to talk. Thank you.
So, Ciaran, let's jump right in. Tell us about a bit about yourself. How did you go from where you began to where you are now?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. So my background is in software engineering, which I didn't do very much of, I have to be honest, in my career. I started off in the semiconductor industry in Ireland here with Intel. I spent a good few years working in the microprocessor manufacturing arena. And then I transitioned from there as part of my role at Intel into the data center industry about 20 years ago. About 20 years ago, and you know, at that time the industry was very new, not quite brand new. I mean, the industry's been around in some form or another, you know, probably since the late 70s, early 80s, but it was right about the time of the dot-com explosion and expansion. So I moved into a couple of consulting roles with Intel. And then I had a couple of other roles with people like Nokia, and then most recently with ABB and ISG. So in my career in the last 20 years in data centers, you know, I've been involved in data center operations, data center design and construction. You know, I've sat on both sides of the facility, both the the white space, the IT element, and then also the critical facilities. And it's been a fantastic journey. Quite honestly, it's you know, I look back on some of the things we've done, you know, as an industry with a lot of pride and a lot of excitement, and you know, look forward to what we're going to do in the future and how, you know, how this industry is so relevant to economic growth and now I think to the challenge, you know, the climate emergency and the whole challenge of sustainability in general. You know, I think this industry is really up for that as well.
I always mute myself. No, Ciaran, that's really such an interesting backstory, but also a really good segue into so much of what we want to discuss in this interview. And so,
Great.
so I guess, I mean, you already mentioned the climate emergency. Why, and you know, and your vast experience with this topic. Why do you think it's so hard to get reliable information about the state of sustainability from within the digital infrastructure sector?
That's a really tough question, and you know, obviously, you know, lots of people have different opinions. I would answer that across a couple of dimensions. Firstly, I think we have to recognize that the need for this information is being driven by climate change, by sustainability generally, which is a relatively new requirement, or at least the intensity or the urgency is relatively new. So I wouldn't say that that the transparency is necessarily a reluctance of the industry. I think it's more a question of the industry maturing. I think if we look across the industry, I think the data is there. I think the tools and the telemetry that we need to get access to the data is there. And I think now it becomes more about the industry understanding why the data is required, what will be done with the data, and what the impact may be on the industry at large and even as individual operators. So it's really more, I think, now about trust and collaboration than it is about, you know, the technical challenge of the data. You know, for example, I mean, I look at Ireland. I mean, very recently, our grid operator, EirGrid, outlined how much of the energy in Ireland is being used by data centers, and that's information that they have. It's not that difficult to find it, but now it becomes a question of a trust and a collaboration across the industry to make sure that the data is being used for good, and it's not disadvantaging anybody, and that people are fully aware and fully bought into, what that data will lead to in the future.
That is, I mean, so on point. I can't, really, I
Good.
couldn't agree with you more. Just in terms of it's a really interesting point you make. Because I'll be frank, sometimes I can be a bit cynical, and I can
Yeah.
say, oh, people have to protect their business model, or there's just this inherent lack of trust or something. But I liked how you just mentioned that about how it's not. It's less about, I wrote this down, it's less about reluctance and more about the maturing of the industry. And that
Yeah.
to me is really interesting how you discuss that.
Yeah,
Um,
and I think, Michael, we can probably get into it, in a subsequent question, but the data itself, there was a time when this data would be considered commercially sensitive, but I think we're gone past that. I mean, everybody expects that their data center operator, their cloud provider, will be sustainably responsible. So we can get into that.
well, I certainly appreciate your optimism there. And I mean, so much of the Open Data Hub is built on trust, for
Yeah.
instance, and like a lot of the work that we're doing is based on trust. So I think actually that's maybe then another good segue into our next question. Let me just, which is, what is preventing the sector right now from becoming transparent? Kind of what's holding companies back then from making things such as power consumption public? If, especially if according to you, there shouldn't be any guardrails anymore. Or rather, there shouldn't be any hesitancy, to put it
Mm,
mildly.
yeah. So I think, Michael, the hesitancy is probably still rooted in a belief that the energy consumption is commercially sensitive, and I think there is some good reason why that might be the case, right? Some companies might consider their energy consumption data to be commercially sensitive. I mean, personally, I don't necessarily feel that myself. And I've talked to a lot of clients that I've had who've come on that journey and are now becoming a lot more open and are willing to be more transparent. And I think the industry now is at a point where the expectation is that if you are providing data center capacity or cloud services, that you can stand up as a supplier and say, I am being as sustainable as I can be. And I think that's an important distinction as well. I mean, sustainability in France, for example, or Norway is a little easier because of the carbon intensity than it would be sometimes in Ireland, for example. So we've got this kind of mix going on. I think the second part of that challenge then for the industry is, for me at least, it's less a focus on the consumption. I'm really interested in the carbon impact of the data center industry, right? And I think that, if we can find a way through collaboration to allow, play operators to talk about, what their carbon impact has been on a weekly or a monthly or an annual basis, and how they see the mitigation. I think that will be a fantastic step forward. I think, the industry recognizes that, if we don't move forward with a more transparent model around, our consumption, we will be legislated at some point to provide that information. So I feel it's better, and that's why I'm really interested in the Open Data Hub. I feel it's better that we really get in there now and start to work with the industry as, interested parties collaborating to find that path forward. And I think that will probably uncover, for everybody, it will probably uncover some new opportunities to be even more efficient.
Well, we certainly appreciate that, but the thing is, we completely agree with you. And this is, for anybody that's watching this, I mean, that's for us, this is one of the biggest, kind of benefits of the Open Data Hub, at least in theory, is that we'll be able
Mm,
to help policymakers and regulators for that matter, make better informed choices. In other words, more data-driven choices or data-driven, kind of data-driven decisions, as opposed to, reactionary ones or whatnot. And so this really leads us really well into our next question, which is, and I hope we haven't already answered it essentially, and that is, how do you think a trustworthy independent reporting body, such as what we're proposing with the Open Data Hub, might actually change a lot of these trends that we've mentioned about, lack of transparency or unwillingness to be transparent, or the variance that exists between these different countries. How might the Open Data Hub change these ongoing issues?
I, let's step back a little bit, and I'm an optimist by nature, and I think generally speaking, the data, the data's there and the telemetry's there, and I think from a technology point of view, we are in good shape. I mean, I think it would be ironic, you'd have to admit, if the data center industry couldn't manage the data. Let's be frank. So I think that we've got that bit cracked. I think for the Open Data Hub, there's a number of things that I'm really interested in. One, I'm really interested in engaging with the industry at large to figure out what we can do to make this a benefit for the industry. So where the operators and the providers see benefit in providing the data, not just for use in shaping policy and benchmarking, but also that they get some benefit themselves in how they, I guess, how they compare themselves to their peers in the industry, or even how they work with local governments to influence energy policy at a country level. Right, so that's the first thing. I think there's got to be something there, for the operators. The second thing, which I think is really important, is it's got to be easy to engage. I really don't think we should be asking the industry to generate another set of reports, right? I think that generally speaking, the data on consumption is probably aggregated at some, regional or national level by the, the operators, the system operators, the distribution system or the transmission system operators. So I think there's an angle there where we can probably, with the permission of the industry, go to these grid providers, these energy providers, and say, look, we really want to start looking at the data, and we can anonymize the data so that people aren't unduly exposed if they don't wish. And then the final piece of it is, and this is kind of where I think back to some of the things that this industry has achieved in the past. When the data is available and the activity is transparent, I would be very confident that this industry will find new ways to solve the problems, to solve the challenges that we haven't even thought of today. And I think back to the earlier part of the 2000s, where simple things like air separation drove down the energy consumption on chillers, where different cooling technologies really made data centers more efficient. I think about the fact that the data center industry continues to deliver more compute capacity and doesn't take up very much more energy. And we've seen some recent reporting from the IEA on that. So there's no doubt that this industry can innovate. There's no doubt that this industry can be forward thinking. And I think that getting this data open and transparent will help promote that level of collaboration and will hopefully point us in a direction we may have not even seen yet.
I certainly appreciate your optimism. I really hope that that's the case as well. And I mean, yeah. but no, I mean, I couldn't agree more in the sense of with the spirit of what you're discussing. And I mean, about how, there needs to be benefits to joining. That is very much something that we've embedded within the Open Data Hub, architectures. And, we know that of course, like, what's in it for me? And that's there's nothing wrong with that question. But we also need to have an answer. And that's what we've outlined in the announcement that we published earlier this year. But I really also appreciate your points that it needs to be easy to engage, and that when data is kind of available, when the transparency is there, it will lead to, you didn't say it, but I would say innovation, or innovation in the sense of being able to address challenges that, you're right, weren't necessarily on the radar even a few years ago. And now we have society, customers, government saying, how are you going to solve these problems?
I think I just want to check the which question next, because there's a point there, Michael, that I think I'll touch on now as well, is that
sure.
The industry, the cloud providers, the CSPs and the data center operators, they're being driven by their clients' requirements as well, right? So their clients are saying, we want you to demonstrate boom sustainability, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's part of the whole ecosystem too.
Which, of course, and I mean, that's one of the, it's not just about external calls for regulation or for
Yeah.
transparency. It's really about it's like demand driven from the customers
Yeah.
themselves, and of course, what speaks louder than people's wallets, or
Exactly.
obviously in this case your customers' wallets. I mean, because that's what it
Exactly.
ultimately it's about. It's about servicing them.
Yeah.
So, you, excellent point, and I'm really glad that you brought that up. Now, turning now to the next question, and I mean, this one is somewhat related, and that is, so given your focus on sustainability, what made you decide to join SDIA? What made you want to become an ambassador?
Um, I've been involved in sort of early stage policy for a number of years. I was part of the EU Code of Conduct, the initial revision of the EU Code of Conduct, and also the EU DCA and Uptime Institute, and I've done a little bit of work with with government bodies in the past and the EU. So I've always been interested in sustainability, and energy politics particularly. Specifically in the case of the SDIA, Michael, I was very intrigued or encouraged to see the SDIA taking a very broad view on sustainability. So
Mm.
sustainability for the SDIA, it's not just about carbon. It's about the supply chain. It's about the kind of work that we do in Europe, for example. It's about having an infrastructure that's sustainable from the point of view of smart cities, from the point of view of embedded carbon, from the point of view of energy consumption, from the point of view of the impact on the environment from water. It's a much more, I felt, a much more holistic view of sustainability. And I have to be honest, up to a couple of years ago, my view on sustainability was carbon, and then I had a look at the UN Sustainability Development Goals, which are a weighty topic in themselves, but it really did get me seeing a much broader view of sustainability, and I think that the SDIA has met that challenge, and I think that the SDIA is taking the position where sustainability is bigger than carbon, and I think that's where the value is going to come from in the longer term.
Well, we certainly appreciate that, and I really do mean that, because
Yeah,
I think, and the link that you just said to how the SDGs actually kind of helped broaden your perspective about sustainability. I mean, this is something that really personally resonates as well, because for so long now, so you don't know so much about me, but I've been an ICT sustainability advocate for since 2016 basically. And for me, I was always saying like, oh, okay, yeah, carbon's a big deal, but what about the minerals? What about the
yeah,
resources? What about water? What about
people.
supply chains?
Yeah,
People, of course, the communities, and so having SDIA come and link all of the SDGs to the roadmap, but also say, yeah, we need to focus on planet, people, business cases, etc. I mean,
yeah.
it's
I,
really holistic, as you said.
I don't know if we can touch on this, Michael, but one of the things that I have learned as well is that ethics and sustainability are not necessarily tightly coupled. You can buy
Mm.
you can buy very sustainable solutions from an energy perspective, but they may not be ethical. So it is multidimensional, and I really do think that the market is sophisticated, and I work with Amazon, for example, in the past, and Amazon are very rigorous about making sure that their supply chain partners have a full view on any ethical or sustainability or governance risks right the way back in the supply chain, and I applaud them for that.
And I always say that all efforts should be applauded when they are including ways to make supply chains cleaner, greener,
Yeah,
more respective of human rights and environmental rights, etc. I mean, so I'm glad that you've had a good experience with them.
sure.
I absolutely agree with you about coupling ethics and sustainability. And if you think about it, what is sustainability? Okay, it's trying to ensure that we can meet the needs of the present without sacrificing the needs of the future. But at the same time, what are those needs? It comes back down to essentially two things: the planet and the people, because we
Yeah,
want to make sure that our external environment is worth living in, and we want to make sure that the people who are alive and populating this and our biospheres are able to have a healthy and happy life, and a prosperous one too. So I mean,
yeah,
so in that sense, it's cyclical, just like with most things in nature, and in the sense
yeah,
of it relies on the other. And so I think that so really the fact that you can bring that perspective in to your ambassadorship, really it's wonderful. It just aligns so perfectly with what we're doing at SDIA and how we
Yeah.
envision all of this together. And so um, let's pivot now and to a bit I mentioned innovation a bit earlier. What do you think will be the impact on innovation and solving some of the problems that, the challenges that you kind of alluded to in the sector when more information on, say, environmental performance or energy and resource consumption are publicly available?
I, the industry, the digital industry has a long history of innovation, clearly, and I would say that this industry is really part of solving the climate challenge and the sustainability challenge in general because of some of the things we can do. And I won't go into all of that detail now, but things like teleworking and new services and new capabilities will keep coming to the fore. I think when we've got a better view, on an even better view, let's call it, on sustainable impact of data centers, we may be innovating about how we deliver services, but also where we deliver those services from. I think there's probably I think there's undoubtedly a huge amount of innovation already in flight around, breaking down workloads. You see it with things like, containers and Kubernetes and all of those technologies that give service providers a lot of flexibility in where they want to work, how they want to run the workload, and potentially where they want to run the workload. So, we will probably find in time that workloads will follow low cost energy, and low cost energy will be energy that's hopefully renewable energy, but it's energy that's available at a point in time where nobody else needs it. So you'll probably find in the future that some of these big heavy workloads will start moving around the network much more elegantly than they do today. And I think that innovation will be software driven. I think it'll be a software defined data center. It'll be software defined power. It'll be software defined everything, quite frankly. And the network will really federate where workload happens for best effect and minimal impact. And I think that's probably the next phase of computing we will see. And I think that will have a very positive impact, very positive impact on the carbon footprint of the data center industry generally.
Uh, I absolutely hope that that's the case. And again, sorry if I sound less than optimistic, but I completely agree with you. And I mean,
Yeah.
I really hope that's how it goes. Just as kind of a slight follow-up question, what is the role of transparency in helping that to come to fruition?
So transparency, across all of the operational elements, water, energy, supply chain, transparency hopefully will give the cloud providers, the data center operators, a view on the real-time impact of a workload at a particular location at a particular point in time, right? So they should know at point X, workload Y will have this impact, and if we move workload Y to another location, it will have this impact. And hopefully there'll be like impact arbitrage. They'll eventually, and I'm sure there'll be artificially intelligent systems to help move the workload, proactively to where the impact is less. But you can really only understand the impact if the data is really understood, and transparency around that data, I think, will be really, really important.
That's brilliant, and I couldn't agree more. And I mean, really, along the same lines, I mean, this is the final question for you, Ciaran. Just along those same lines, what do you think will be the first area within digital infrastructure that it would radically change or will radically change if metrics like energy consumption are publicly reported?
Um, I think change is a good way to put it. I think the area with the most potential right now is the whole concept of edge computing.
Mm.
Really putting the workload into more fit for purpose capacities and moving it closer to where it needs to be. I think there's still going to be obviously a need for large data centers to host very static data or data that doesn't change much. But I think the whole area of edge and how edge interacts with the telecoms infrastructure, I think that's where we're going to see a lot of innovation. um, in the past, we assumed that if you just build the data centers bigger and bigger, they become more and more efficient. And that may be the case for some workloads, but I don't think that will be the case for every workload. And I think that's where I would expect to see most of the innovation. But generally, I'm optimistic about the industry's ability to innovate and get better and more efficient. And Moore's law and many examples of that are there for us all to see. But on the other side, the challenge is that collaboration and trust. The challenge is bringing the industry together, to really share and to make people feel comfortable with sharing this information, so that we can find an even more efficient way to do what we do today.
Ciaran, you couldn't have ended this or concluded this in such a better way. You're absolutely right. That the challenge is collaboration and trust. That is very much what we at SDIA are trying to do. We understand that it is not always easy. It's
No.
it's certainly difficult in many ways. There's lots of obstacles to that. There's a lot of oftentimes pre-existing ways of working, or pre-existing modes of working, or however you want to call it, that may prove onerous to overcome. But we
But
appreciate
but
that we're doing it.
But Michael, just on that, right? And I
Yeah,
don't know if you're recording this, and you can use this.
we are.
I was at an industry event yesterday, and I was talking to somebody who works for one of the major data center operators, global operators, and we concluded that we're probably getting to a point in time now where there's going to be like the cloud buyers alliance, right?
Mm,
So where large enterprises will come together, people like the Ford Motor Company and HSBC Bank and
mhm.
Deutsche Bank, they will start to get together, and they will say, right, we are now the cloud buying alliance, and this is our code of conduct. This is what we expect. So I think that this coalescing and collaboration and trust, this is the piece that I'm really excited about the SDA playing in, because I think we can advocate for that kind of change.
That is wonderful. And of course, that to me also says, like, it's always better to get ahead of what's coming or what
Yeah,
people want. I mean, when I say people, I mean consumers, customers, whatever, regulators. It's always better to be ahead and come to them to say, oh yeah, we already did the work. Here you go. We
yeah,
understand and recognize that this is a priority for you, and therefore it's a priority for us.
yeah.
And so, Ciaran, really, this brings us to the end of of the interview, and I cannot thank you enough for joining us today. Thank you so much. We really look forward to working more with you, and we appreciate all of your support.
Great. My pleasure, Michael. Thank you very much.
To all of those who tuned into this interview, thank you for joining as well. In case you're interested in learning more, you can check out our blog, as well as follow us on LinkedIn or Twitter. And remember, together we can build a sustainable digital economy and realize our roadmap to sustainable digital infrastructure by 2030. Thank you again.